Hello and welcome to IGPP Expert Talks. I am Heena Goswami, Editorial Consultant with IGPP, Institute for Governance, Policies and Politics, New Delhi. The recently passed Women's Reservation Bill, or the Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam, has been hailed as a victory by most. However, speculations are also rife on the timing of the bill, the way it was passed, and when actually it would be implemented. To discuss what the passing of the bill means for women in India, what are its hits and misses, we have with us Professor Krishna Menon. Professor Krishna Menon teaches gender studies and was formerly the Dean, School of Human Studies at Ambedkar University, Delhi. Her area of interest include political theory, Indian politics, and feminist theory in politics. She has published several books, papers, and articles on the same. Welcome to IGPP Expert Talks, ma'am.
Thank you, Heena, and thank you for inviting me to IGPP. I'm looking forward to this conversation with you.
How momentous is this occasion of the passing of the Women's Reservation Bill, the Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam? Please shed a little light on the struggle that has led us to this moment.
So, as you said, it certainly is a momentous occasion, and it's been just a few weeks since the bill, the 128th Amendment bill was passed in Parliament with a nearly unanimous vote. It's popularly referred to as Women's Reservation Bill, but its technical name now is, as you said very rightly, Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam. It is undoubtedly a historic moment, but there are many commentators who are a bit concerned that it might end up being trapped by the histrionics that accompanies the passage of the bill, rather than make it into a truly transformative intervention. So in order to understand where this anxiety comes from, it might be good to retrace our steps a little bit. So it's not a new idea. The idea of representation based on population, the idea of quota, the idea of reservations as it is called popularly in India, it has been tried and it has succeeded in various ways in various parts of the world. In India, the idea of women's reservation itself has a very long history. But it's quite interesting to know that in pre-independence India, in fact, as early as Government of India Act 1919, women were allowed to vote in the Legislative Council. So this was the first time that in modern context, Indian women were getting an opportunity to take part in decision making. So the question for us to always remember, the answer to the question that we need to remember is, why should women have reservations in politics? And the answer to that is very simple, which is that women must have equal ability to take part in decision making. And for this, not only political decision making. So for this, not only should they have the right to vote, but they should also be able to represent in decision-making bodies, participate in decision-making bodies. And it was with this idea that fledgling steps were taken, but these were of course steps taken by the colonial government. But as early as 1925 or 26, Dr. Muthulakshmi Reddy becomes a nominated member of the Madras Legislative Council. So there's a long history of women in India participating in the legislative process itself. But it's quite, it's pertinent for us to remember that prior to independence, most women's organizations in India were extremely uncomfortable with the idea of women's reservation. They believed that in a way, seeking reservation is akin to admission of inadequacy. And they wanted to become an important part of the political process on their own merit. Yeah, they understood merit differently from how some of us understand it today. So they thought that this was a compromise and this was against the principle of equality. This was women's organizations in India prior to independence. So they remained steadfastly opposed to the idea of reservation for women. In fact, many of them even went so much ahead to say that extending reservation for women is a way of dividing India. And at that point, the most important issue at stake was national unity. So we must not detract from that goal, and therefore any kind of special reservation is not a good idea for the sake of nationalist politics. Then we come to the crucial stage of constitution making. And within the Constituent Assembly, you know that there were about 11 women who were part of the Constituent Assembly, you know, the drafting process and all of that. And it's not surprising to learn that most of them remained opposed to the idea of reservation for the same reason, because they thought of themselves as feminists, if I might use that word, although they might not have used that word to describe themselves. They rejected the idea of concessions for women. They thought that this is going to be our constitution, it's going to be our democracy. Where is the need for special concessions? Women, by their sheer dint of hard work and talent, will have the opportunity to come up. As you know, the first elections happened and there were just 4% of women in that parliament. But let's not just go by numbers. So we must not have a narrow quantitative approach to women's participation in legislative processes. This 4% women who were in the first Parliament of India, very interestingly, were women who made a huge difference by their interventions in Parliament. So I want to, for example, give you the instance of Renu Chakravarti, who was an MP from West Bengal. Back in the day, she actually asks for equal pay for equal work. Now, this is a very bold, radical demand to be made in the 1950s, but she does ask for this. The quality of the interventions made by women parliamentarians like Sucheta Kriplani, Rajkumari Amrit Kaur, they were stellar women. So although they were just 4%, but the kind of things that they asked for. And I think that's really something that I would like to keep reminding ourselves about. You know, it's not about the numbers of women. Finally, I think it would also be important for these women who will come to Parliament to help in making laws that are egalitarian, that respect fairness, justice, and plurality and diversity. If they are going to perpetuate the existing political frameworks, then I'm not very sure how substantive these reservations would be. They'll still serve a cosmetic purpose, that I'm not denying that, but whether they would lead to a substantive difference or not is the question. So from 4% to today's Parliament, which has one of the highest representation of women, which is at around 14.5 or 15%, it's been a long journey. But even after independence, till about the 1970s, there wasn't much conversation at all about reservation for women. And then comes the really landmark study called the Towards Equality Report, which was done by a committee set up by the Government of India, the Committee on the Status of Women in India. And this committee actually flags women's deplorable presence in organized work, poor wage earning, poor health, education, and political participation. But again, what is crucial is that the committee, by majority, voted against reservation. So there were two women who presented a vote of dissent, Latika Sarkar and Veena Muzumdar. These two women said that no, it looks like it's time to have reservations, because in a highly unequal system, unless you make certain special provisions, women would not be able to overcome these historical barriers. But that was not obviously passed, it was recorded. But by the 1990s, things begin to change a lot, especially in North Indian politics, with what is usually referred to as Mandalization. The mobilization of OBCs in North India brings forth a new kind of discourse. The consolidation and strengthening of Dalit politics in much of India makes even women's movements look at the issue of equality in a more substantive way rather than in the earlier formal way. So it's not enough to have laws. Given inequalities that pervade in our society, sometimes in the interest of equality, special provisions like reservations would be needed. So from the 90s, women's movement has been actually campaigning for and advocating women's reservation. But as you know, 1996 was the first time that the bill was introduced. But prior to that, the 73rd and 74th Amendment Bill actually already tried it out by introducing it in the Panchayati Raj institutions. So from 96 till 2023, there have been many reasons for why the bill, could not see the light of day, although it created a lot of interest, debate and discussion, which is, I think, the way it should be in a democracy. So it took 20 odd years, but I think that is how sometimes really important changes are introduced. So it is certainly a momentous occasion, but as I said earlier, if you look at the objectives that the bill has, so every bill that is introduced in the parliament has something called objectives. So the objectives to this bill actually place this bill in the company of other welfare schemes that the government of India has introduced for women. So the Ujjwala cooking gas scheme, the toilet scheme, the financial inclusion, that's Swachhata Abhiyan and all of that. Now, a lot of critics are concerned that by placing the women's reservation bill in the company of these welfare measures, is the bill not being seen as the right that women have to be individual citizens, agential, able to transform their own lives, or are they simply being seen as passive recipients of largesse that the state is doling out, gas subsidy, some seats in parliament? Will it end up being that, or will it be a game changer? Now, I don't think it's fair to expect the state to bring about all changes. The state has done what it can, or the Parliament of India has done what it can. I think it is for the people of India, for the social movements in India, for the women's movement and other democratic movements in India to come together and actually ensure that the bill, whenever it is implemented, does not remain a toothless piece of legislation, but actually becomes a transformative tool for women's empowerment.
So, as you mentioned, this is the first time the bill has been passed, but it had been introduced in the parliament on previous occasions. And then there were demands of quota within the quota in the women's reservation bill. How are the issues of caste hierarchies? That was the idea behind quota within quota. So how are the issues of caste hierarchies and women's reservation bill interrelated? And does that context remain relevant today? Because this time around, when the bill has been passed, the demand for quota within quota has been rather muted.
So, Heena, it's interesting that you asked me this question and asked me to compare the two different contexts, the earlier outings of the bill and the 2023. See, one crucial difference is that this time the bill has been passed with a majority. And that's heartening in some measure, but it's disheartening because there is no timeline for the bill. Yeah, and there are too many caveats. It will happen after the census, after the delimitation, then we will see about it. Now, as far as for many erstwhile critics, perhaps that's why you think it's muted. Since there's no clear timeline, and since reservation based on caste is contingent upon census, it's too early to say. So when the census happens, and if at that point there is no quota within quota, then I'm sure the erstwhile, the people you sort of identified as critics, I'm sure there will be an outcry, because there is really no, if the bill has to do what it should do for the sake of Indian democracy, for the sake of equality in this country, substantive equality, not formal equality, then recognizing various intersectionalities of power and privilege and hierarchy and discrimination is crucial if we want the bill to actually do what it wants. If our aim is substantive equality, then we have to recognize that all women are not the same. That women within India, all Indian women are not the same. Our experiences are determined by our caste, class, religious affiliation, ethnic identity, ability, age, so on and so forth. Caste is one of the biggest and most important vertices around which, discrimination and privilege play themselves out. So if we really want to bring about meaningful change and allow the voices from a wide cross-section of Indian women to reach the parliament, we will have to be mindful about quota within quota, as it is called. Otherwise, the fear is that it would be monopolized by women who already have a head start in life, who already have access to education and social and culture capital. They'll further capitalize on this by consolidating their positions in parliament. That is not to say that they won't make a difference. I'm sure they will. But to create substantive change in society and to create equity in society, we will have to spread the net wide. If the intention is to bring about substantive change, substantive equality, then I think quota within quota is a must. Perhaps you sense the demand as muted right now because there is no clear timeline of when what is going to happen. But there have been, already there have been people, leaders and analysts who have flagged this issue. So it's very much there, it's not gone away anywhere, and I'm sure that when the time comes, whenever it is, 2029 or later, whenever the bill will finally be implemented, this aspect will have very, very crucial significance.
I have two related questions. So you mentioned that it's not about just the quantity, but the quality and the substantive change that women can make. So having reservation to ensure representation, and not just representation, but also ensure that they are, setting the agenda for decision making, right? So how instrumental can be reservation in ensuring that? Are there any lessons that we have learned from the passing of the 73rd and the 74th Amendment, and that has ensured reservation for women in Panchayat bodies and urban bodies?
Yeah. So I think that's really that's an important facet that we should learn from. So the passing of the Panchayati Raj 73rd, 74th amendments, they were met with a lot of excitement on the one hand and a lot of resistance and skepticism on the other hand. Oh, what will these women do? They'll become proxy candidates for their fathers and fathers-in-law. They don't even know what local administration is about. And all these observations were true to a certain extent, because it is a fact that that's the reality for most women in India. But it's also equally true that in the last so many years, since the implementation of these acts, we have seen women at the decentralized level of local governance that India has in villages and urban local bodies actually making a huge change. This is not to exaggerate and say that all women in all panchayats have made transformative change. It is also not to suggest that all women are absolutely independent of their husbands or fathers-in-law. It's really not to make sweeping generalizations, but on the other hand, one cannot ignore the fact, and there are actual studies. So, for example, there is a landmark study by Chattopadhyay and Esther Duflo, which looks at women as policy makers in the panchayats, and they compare. They tell us what has happened in West Bengal, and they tell us what has happened in Rajasthan. And the kind of policies, so what they conclude after a very extensive sample that they study and engage with, is that wherever there were women in panchayat bodies, the kind of policies that they were interested in looking at was qualitatively different. So for instance, they give the example of a hand pump that was broken and ineffective in a village for very long. But when a woman became sort of responsible for that due to the Panchayati Raj reservations, one of the first things that she did was to try and address this issue, because water for cooking, water for drinking, all of this was really part of her everyday life, and she understood how this actually, having to go travel a long distance, walk a long distance to get water, has an impact on women's health, women's employment opportunities, women's leisure time, women's ability to go meet their own family members. Everything actually is contingent upon these daily necessities. So road, children's health, health center within the village, water supply, school building, all of these have actually become very important policy matters in many of these panchayats, because women have been able to see the connection between their overall well-being and these basic necessities that they have the power over. That is not to say that men don't. I don't think that's the necessary conclusion, but I think women are able to see through their daily experience, and policymakers are able to see that this connection that is there between women's everyday struggles of just maintaining daily life, food, water, health, and their ability to move ahead in life socially, educationally, professionally, they are intimately interlinked because of that unequal division of household labor. And this becomes a game changer. When women are able to take decisions, they are able to take decisions that make their everyday life easier. In turn, it has a spin-off effect. When their everyday life becomes easier, hopefully many other women will get the opportunity to travel to the nearby town and attend classes in college, go take a tuition class at a center to take some entrance exam. All of these become possible when women are actually in positions of power in Panchayati Raj institutions. So if you see, one of the things that is plaguing us right now is that women's participation in the labor force is not going up. In fact, in India it is amongst the lowest, and that's worrying. And there are many reasons for this, but some broad reasons, as you would know. One is, of course, the unequal division of labor. Second is the perception of and the fear of violence in public spaces, sexual violence, lack of security that women sense, poor infrastructure for women, toilets, public toilets, conspicuous by their absence in many parts of urban India, poor transport facilities that women can access, affordable and safe, and child care facilities, and the nature of employment that is changing in rural India. So I'm not going into all of that. So there are complex set of reasons for why women's labor participation is declining. Now the hope really is that if more and more women become part of the parliament, they would be interested in legislating on such issues that will make women's everyday life easier. more investment in transport, more investment in infrastructure, public toilets, better safety and security for women, and maybe some legislation on division of household labor. I don't know, it's far too controversial. So if all of that happens, women would be freed up to take employment outside their homes and thus participate in paid employment, in organized labor, which is really, I mean, even from the purely narrow economics point of view, it's heartening for the economy. You are able to use the labor power of half your population there. So I do see that in the long run, there is going to be, whenever the bill gets implemented, there would be a series of changes. At least that's the hope.
What are some steps other than reservation that we can take to ensure more representation of women, and also to ensure that women's issues such as sexual harassment at workplace, sexual violence in homes, labor participation, safety, nutrition, mental health are considered no less important?
So, the answer to this question, Heena, of course, it's very long and complex, but in short, these are not women's issues. They have to be seen as issues that affect the relationship between men, women, and other genders. So, it's really important for us to reach out to men. I think so that there is an understanding that what happens to the women in their lives, in their families, in their communities is not a women's issue. It is their issue as well. Like I tried to give you the example of women not being able to participate in labor actually has an impact on India's economy. Yeah, so each of these small units of experience that men and women have with each other has an impact on the macro level as well. So to be able to establish the connection between individual well-being and rights, whether it is men, women, or any other gender, and the national, platform, I think that's really important to communicate this message and to make everyone understand that as a democracy, all of us are citizens of this country and have been granted rights by the Constitution, which each of us should be able to enjoy and exercise and experience. That idea is what I think needs to be really communicated. And then, of course, so once there is this acceptance, then you can take many concrete steps, very often when you are when one is part of such discussions, the immediate answer is we'll install more CCTVs and we'll, install more lights. All important. But if you are not going to understand why you are doing this, why do you need better lighting? Why do you need more toilets for women in public spaces? So that women also have access to the public spaces of this city, of which they are equal partners. That will enable them to contribute to the growth and success of the country. This realization should guide whatever policies we take. So there are, of course, policy level initiatives, scholarships, better safety, more, sexual harassment, anti-sexual harassment cells, all of these things you can do. But if the approach is paternalistic and protectionist, then I think it will result in a different kind of consequences. But if the approach is that women and men and other genders, they are all equal partners in this community and they have equal rights, then I think the consequences would be very different. So I'm afraid I don't have a checklist, because I know that the best of checklists would not succeed in producing the kind of consequences that we are imagining if the thinking behind that is not what I just detailed.
Thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining us
Thank
today, and thank you for such a crisp and valuable interview. Thank you so much.
Thank you.